This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
Okay, I had a really interesting message from a chap, Thomas, who's on my Patreon. I think if you've got questions like this sort of stuff that are sort of personal to you, I'd encourage you that questions that I get on this stuff, if you're asking them, I'm sure that other people will be thinking the same. So feel free to ask them. I'm always looking for ideas to talk about stuff that might help someone, if that makes any sense. But anyway, Thomas was asking, and he's sort of taken this approach of trying to get into improvisation sort of in the way that I do. If you see the starts of... It's not turned on. Turned on, it wasn't even on my head. Ideal. So, Thomas was asking, so he was kind of getting into this approach of improvisation similar to what I do. So at the start of every video of mine, you see basically I will lay down a loop essentially to a click of chords, and then after that, kind of the wheels are in motion and I improvise over that kind of bed of stuff. And yeah, so I just wanted to share some thoughts on this. So what Thomas is finding, I think, is that he said essentially he's okay with kind of the first part of the improvisation, which is be about finding like a melody line and that sort of stuff. But when he starts to deviate from that melody line, he feels like he's losing flow, and he feels like the things that happen after that are maybe not connected, maybe don't sound right, don't sound good, don't sound as good as the stuff that came before. He asks, is this a problem of not having enough lick vocabulary? Doesn't find that he ever gets further than that melody because basically anything he plays after it doesn't sound cohesive. Things that he had tried is sort of playing
or stealing vocal melodies and playing from the 5th pentascale, which I didn't quite understand what he meant by that. However, this is a thing that wasn't working for him, so let's not go down that route anyway. And then also, I asked him how long he'd been doing this or trying to improvise, and Thomas then said about 8 years. So that seems like a fair chunk of time when you hear it. But then what I'd also encourage you to say is that even some of the very best professional and famous guitarists that we know are not particularly improvising guitarists, right? And I think there is a difference. And so if this is a thing that you want to get into, I guess we should at first say it's not necessarily even required to get to beyond the top tier of being a guitarist. Like Steve Vai is still playing the same solos that were recorded before I was a kid, and his audience, people are absolutely fine with that. So I think writing a solo is just as valid as improvising, so that's worth bearing in mind. But if you're interested in improvisation, and which I am because it's kind of like a daily part of what I do, then I guess this is a video for you. So first things, I've been interested in improvising solos, I think, probably since the very early days when I was sort of playing along with Thin Lizzy on a cassette tape. And certainly as far back as I can remember, I was trying to pick out things and play my own things and figure stuff out in that way. So I think always playing along with records and trying to do that sort of thing can really help. This idea of like stealing vocal melodies, I think anything that you can attempt to play on a guitar, it's a good exercise to try and do that. And certainly vocal melodies is a great place to start, sax melodies and other guitarists as well. But things like if you can hear a synth line that's in a tune, like in this introduction now I was kind of hinting at Paris by the 1975, figuring out what that is, being able to play that, I think that kind of goes hand in hand with improvisation. Is not just that you have like seamless ideas and stuff like that, but more that you're able to pick something out that you may have heard once or twice before, or that sort of stuff. In any case, I think the best improvisation for me comes when I'm not thinking about it and when I'm not putting pressure on myself. And to that end, this video in particular, I think I recorded that intro over the course of about 20 minutes whilst Elodie was having a bath. Actually, that's way more takes than I would normally have. And if anything, it probably made my playing worse. So I'm going to put those at the back of the video in case you want to see some of the fluff ups and the sort of stuff that happens. So for me, I don't have as much time as I used to. So I tend to, improvisation is really important to me. But also trying to get something that sounds okay first or second time is equally even more important for me right now. So I guess improvisation for me matters. So I wanted to talk about some thoughts that I had from the outset. One of these concerns like the length of the solo, and I can remember sort of as getting involved with live music sort of about 10 years ago, again, so this was like the first time really getting involved again where it was required sometimes that you play a solo and that sort of stuff. One of the things that could really shake you up, and this is the thing, so you might be improvising around a tune and you sort of go round one time and then you get to the end of your solo and then whoever's leading the band is going, go on, let's just go around again. And you kind of think, well, actually, what I had in mind was that I just do this one chorus. And so then you kind of got to start again. On the flip side, sometimes it's happened where I'm thinking that I'm going to get two solos. And then you start playing, you get some sort of build going. It never gets to that peak that you were hoping for. And then the solo is kind of, it's time to get on with the song, and so your solo never really gets there. So all that meant for me, what I'm taking from that is that actually like the length of the solo kind of does matter. And for me, especially with these videos, these are introduction parts are way longer improvisations than most of the most famous solos of all time, right? you think like normally 8 to 16 bars is a pretty long solo in a pop song. So except for instrumental music, generally things aren't going to be this long. But if you're just think about the length of the solo, I think it's easier in some ways to have a slightly shorter solo, because obviously there's less chances to sort of slip up in that context. But if it's too short, you're going to feel like you need to cram a lot of stuff in, and that necessarily could also get you in a wrong kind of mindset. And all of this, I think, is partly or quite a lot down to mindset and a confidence kind of thing, where the more you do it, the more it feels like something you can do, if that makes sense. And on that point, thinking whilst doing is probably an enemy of this. So I think you're trying to, as much as possible, just be in the moment and not think too hard, because as you'll see in the outro here, as you start to build up frustration and you're starting to think about what you're playing more, that to me tends to be where I'm more likely to slip up. Whereas if I'm just not really even thinking and just playing and trying to enjoy myself, like most days where I don't get to do more than one take, that's actually where I end up probably coming up with something a bit better. And oftentimes, actually, the recordings that I've played on more recently for a chap, Ollie, oftentimes I've just sent him the first take that I put down. And actually, I did another recording for Brad the other day, and it's like I'll put down 3 takes, but there's kind of like a sweet spot to this stuff where 1 or 2 or 3 goes might be enough to take you out of that space, because it can be kind of intense, and trying to stay in that flow thing is definitely a thing. So practicing improvisation and just enjoying it is kind of different to trying to record a take to camera, in which case, like, if you're trying to do that, for me, I would try to keep takes down to a minimum. If I was just enjoying it, then play along as long as you want and can. And for me, it's an everyday thing, and I think this is a thing that I did speak to someone from a pretty big band about, and he was asking me about my improvisation stuff, because he used to improvise quite a lot, and then his show became kind of run to click, and they had stuff on track and stuff, and you get away from these moments of improvisation. And so I think that's an important thing to remember, that it's actually kind of like its own little weird muscle, just like in some ways being able to play the same thing every time, like running a show completely like note for note, is definitely another skill in and of itself. To make it like a daily habit that you say, right, I'm going to spend 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is that you can, just trying to improvise and trying to create these moments of melody from nowhere, and trying to forget that you've made a mistake at all if it happens. Like on stage for me, early on, and probably once I get back to gigging again, this might be the thing again, that I definitely have moments where I'm like, oh, that was awful, that wasn't great. Most of the time when I look back on it, if I've recorded it, it wasn't as bad as I thought. And so I think it's a case of being in your own head and kind of putting yourself down a little bit. But even if you aren't great at it, the negative kind of self-talk and thinking about mistakes doesn't help things anyway. So trying to enjoy the moment and trying to enjoy each note and try to get the most out of it, even if it's not exactly what you think you want to sound like, it's what you sound like right now. It's maybe less about the notes you play, more about the friends you make along the way. One of my kind of top tips for this, and particularly if you're already thinking that you're able to come up with melodies in general, would be this idea of the AABA form, where we're kind of getting used to implied structure within our solos. And this is something that I do quite a lot of the time, particularly at the start of a solo, where we're sort of stating a phrase, maybe stating it again, maybe then going away from it, and then maybe stating that phrase again, because that is a really important skill that can help to bring some kind of structure to what is an improvised thing. Oh, that's my phrase. I've restated the phrase. That's my B. And I've actually forgotten what my initial phrase was there, but it doesn't even particularly matter. The idea is that you're trying to superimpose this sort of constraint on the improvisation, and even if it's not working fully, there's still enough there that like that could give the illusion that it's more planned than in fact it is, just because I've repeated a thing that I did a few times. Same thing again, I'm completely not really doing much other than kind of listening, because I've done this so much, listening and thinking, right, I'm going to do the same thing-ish twice, I'm going to deviate B and then come back to it again. And some of my best solos, that sort of thing is definitely how I'd start the thing, and especially where you're trying to build a solo out of there. So that'd be a really good kind of framework for starting any solo, and then being conscious of what you're improvising throughout. And you maybe chuck some of this stuff away when it comes to actually literally trying to be in the moment, but that kind of thing and listening intently to like a snare drum can really help you to stay away from this super sort of overthinking everything kind of aspect. I think for me, so I'm trying not to think too much about every single note or things that have gone wrong. What I am trying to do is kind of think of the bigger picture where I'm hearing a snare drum, being in time with that, and also these little principles of like A, B, A, that's a real key one for me, or kind of being a little bit conscious in there of what I'd played before so that I could sort of reference that. And sometimes it doesn't happen, sometimes it will happen, it'll be completely different. So that's kind of like an idea of a motif. These things are what gives a solo like the illusion of being more planned and more cohesive. And I don't think it's so much about, playing certain notes over certain chords as much of the time as it is about the wider kind of picture, like playing solidly in time, these ideas where it's sort of like repeating motifs throughout a solo, and all that sort of stuff, because I'm really rarely actually thinking of notes. I have my kind of things that I aim for, that I like the sound of, which happen to be the 5th, the 9th, and the 7th if I'm in A, maybe the 3rd. But I'm generally just thinking of the whole key. Just stood on my glasses, so that's ideal. But that's just some of my... Oh, the lens has come out. It's gone well, hasn't it? So that's some of my thoughts initially, Thomas. So I think it's about trying to stay kind of positive with it, and trusting that over time you're putting in the time to get better at this thing. I think it's almost pointless comparing your improvisation to other people's, because it's an intensely personal thing, and what people are uploading may not be improvisation at all. I think there's definitely more people that are uploading prepared stuff than actual improvised stuff, so don't feel like you're unusual if you don't find it supernatural to kind of come out with these long flowing improvisations as like your standard mode of operation. Like a lot of people, or most people, don't improvise that much, right? Is kind of my thoughts on that. So I'm gonna get back into the messages with Thomas and kind of think about this some more. But that's just some kind of thoughts about the improvisation stuff. Like also improvisation is really variable day on and day. I've got a headache today. I feel quite unwell, so I think that's part of why that improvisation session earlier today was less successful than it might have been. There are certainly days where you'll feel more inspired than others, but it's kind of about each day putting in something and seeing what comes out. It's kind of the fun of the journey. And when I'm not feeling super whatever, or like my hands aren't working especially well, play slower. Just some thoughts on that. Yeah, if you've got ideas for this sort of video, then please do feel free to suggest other stuff via email or Patreon Messenger. I'm going to need to figure out how to get a lens back in here and straighten these out. Thanks for stopping by, and yeah, here's some outtakes from earlier. Cheers.
One thing to notice, I've just put it at the end of the video, I've just edited this part now, just put in some of the like flops and bits. What I noticed was actually at the start of the session recording this, where I wasn't trying to force something, there were actually kind of like 2-3 pretty decent takes, and then gradually as I started to get in my own head thinking like on a video about improvisation, like I want it to be a really good improvisation at the start, that's where things start to drop off. So I think probably that might be the same for you as well. So where you're really trying to be good and where you're really trying to improvise something great is probably where you're going to come up against the most blockages, versus just kind of seeing what happens. I know it's super like flaky and not really advice in any way, but I think at least sharing the experience. And Thomas, you just sent me a guitar solo of yours which sounded really, really cool, and you said like this wasn't really planned and I wasn't really overthinking it and wouldn't record it again because I was actually in the moment and I don't think I'd ever get there again. I think that people can probably relate to that, where there can be a peak sometimes in your improvisation, and for me that is normally like take 1 or 2, and then gradually the more takes you do, you might find that energy kind of starts to go and you start to kind of lose faith in your own improvisation, if that makes sense.